What chance do we have?
What chance do we have?
The question is, what choice?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Followers of the Force. It's a '90s TV special now. Obviously, I'm Rachel here with David and Hannah and Jason, and we have as our special guest today Robin Marty, who is author of a new handbook for a Post-Roe America. Little bio. Robin Marty is the Director of Operations for the West Alabama Women's Center and a freelance reporter, author of the book Handbook for a Post-Roe America, a guidebook for what to do if and when Roe is overturned. She's also the co-author of The End of Roe versus Wade. Robin specializes in abortion rights and the anti-abortion movement and figure, and is regular columnist on reproductive rights issue at Dame Magazine. So thank you for coming on, Robin. We really appreciate it.
I have been really excited about this all day, like nerdily excited. So just so you know, I'm very excited. Let's see if I can stay calm.
Well, that's good. We have been very excited to have you on. I just finished reading the book, as I told everybody before, and I found it really, really helpful as somebody who lives in a state where abortion is still legal, because Illinois has protections for that. But going forward, how I can help others and what if something happens nationally. We are obviously still raising money for our What Choice fundraiser at gofundme.com/what-choice. And so we'd like to do that as well. So what I'm I know how to use StreamYard, I do really. So we wanted to talk to you about what's next for reproductive care in America. Where do we see things going from here? Because Roe versus Wade was the national overarching decision, and now it's back to the states. So where do we think we're going to go from here?
Right. So what it's looking like right now is that we are going to have an even more divided country than we did in the past. At this point, there are 11 states that no longer allow any legal abortion, or only allow it up to the first 6 weeks, which is basically just 2 weeks after you realize you missed your period. So in essence, there isn't really any abortion access there at all. That's 11 states. We expect to lose even more within the next year. So there's a very strong possibility that within the next few months, or by the beginning of 2023, yes, that's the year that happens next, hopefully, we will be in a place where essentially abortion is legal over in the West Coast and the Northeast and Illinois and Minnesota and Colorado. And that's basically going to be it. The rest of the country is going to be without legal abortion access, and there is never going to be enough clinics or enough doctors or enough anything to be able to take in all of the people who will still need care, even if we can somehow find the money to move everybody out of their states to get legal abortions. That's the good version. There's also the possibility that if we do not get enough people out to the polls in 2022 or in 2024, that we're going to see a full-scale national abortion ban happen, in which case then everybody's screwed. Also, we are very much expecting that the states that have currently banned abortion are probably going to, as their next action, when they go back to the legislature, start to whittle down on access to contraception in general. So we are expecting to lose emergency contraception, especially in the South, probably IUDs, anything that's really effective. We will probably see most contraception be limited only to people who are married at best. But the reality is that this has already happened in a lot of ways, because when you are in states down south like Alabama, Mississippi, these states do not have access to the same contraceptives that everybody else does. It's an area that has not expanded Medicaid, so nobody actually has health insurance. Those people who do have health insurance find it extraordinarily difficult to get into doctors. Most of the people in Alabama actually use hospitals as their primary care, and they don't get any form of health care until they get to that point. In Alabama, there are two Planned Parenthood clinics that offer birth control in a sliding scale way. And anybody else who wants to access contraception has to do it at their county health department. And that's usually 2 to 4 months wait in order to get an IUD or an implant or anything that's really effective. Actually, it's 2 to 4 months wait just to get healthcare in general at them, which is really awful. So we are talking about a really dire set of states that are going to have basically no preventative health care when it comes to making sure that people don't get pregnant if they don't want to. And this is on top of the fact that this is an area that already has about 50% of their pregnancies are unplanned. So when you put that together with lack of health care in general, no maternal health care afterward, we're looking at a situation where people are going to die. And they're not going to die because they try to access illegal abortions and get hurt. In many ways, accessing an abortion right now, especially if somebody obtains medication abortion online, that's the safest thing that you can do. It's not being able to access an abortion and being forced to give birth, being forced to go through pregnancy, often without getting prenatal care to start with, going into hospitals that are overcrowded, not being able to get doctors who believe you when you're in pain or when you say that there's something wrong with the pregnancy, because we have a white supremacist medical system out here and it does not believe in Black people's pain. So I'm very worried about this next chapter in the United States, and I'm worried about people's lives, not because abortion is harmful or that it's going to be unsafe when it's illegal, but because so many people are going to be forced to give birth.
And just be pregnant when women are more likely to die by homicide when they're pregnant, women and anyone who can get pregnant, but that's a very dangerous time for anyone.
It is very much so. And I mean, there's so much that goes into that, not just from a domestic violence standpoint, but also domestic abusers have a tendency to use pregnancy coercively in order to trap people to stay in relationships with them. And that's a very real thing that we deal with, especially in the South. There's so many different forms of reproductive coercion that we don't talk about. That's obviously one of them, when partners will try to do some form of reproductive coercion on a person who can become pregnant. We hear anti-abortion activists talk all the time about the idea of someone forcing someone into an abortion, and how if they could just convince the father to talk to her and say that he would stay there with her, she never would have the abortion, but she's doing it because of him. The reality is that most people are, when they decide that they want an abortion, they do it uncoerced. Obviously, they do it for economic factors. Oftentimes they do it because they don't want to be pregnant, but coercion happens in so many different forms. And the reality is that we have a government that coerces people to remain pregnant. That is what abortion bans and abortion access restrictions are about. That is what not allowing people to have access to contraception is about. That's what not expanding Medicaid is about. It is all a form of governmental reproductive coercion. And so when we recognize that, we understand that we have a government that is most definitely treating people who can become pregnant in a completely different way than it's treating everybody else, and how that can't be seen as a form of sexism or racism or any of these isms, and obviously needs to be protected as a human rights thing. It's baffling to me that it's being argued as anything else.
That's been a... Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you dumbfounded? I'm also really fun at parties. I have lots of really.
No, I mean, if anything, I'm just sort of picking my jaw up off the floor, like listening to Robin talk, because it just, I guess,
it's real bad. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, the southern state, because I used to live in the Panhandle of Florida, and it didn't. This was a long time ago, probably about 30 years ago. And it didn't really feel that way down there at the time, but it just seems like just over the last 10, 20 years or so, it's just so ramped up. And is there
No,
like,
I promise you, the Panhandle of Florida was maybe you weren't seeing what was. I mean, I'm not saying you weren't paying attention, but the Panhandle of Florida, especially like Pensacola area, that
oh,
was that was 30 years ago. That was the height of anti-abortion activity. That
oh
was
no, I know there was a clinic that got bombed
yes,
that was right down the road from my house when I was a kid.
yes.
So yeah,
So yeah, it's always been bad. And the thing, yes, Florida has always been Florida. I don't think there are any truer words that could be spoken.
Hi, David. How's Florida?
Oh, you know, I just look at Disney and I'm like, that's the only sane place that I can go to and kind of just forget about things for a day. But yeah, things are not good. Not
Well,
good at
and
all.
Florida is a really interesting dilemma right now because literally it is the only access point for abortion in the South. We've lost Texas, obviously. Louisiana just lost their last challenge. Mississippi already closed their clinic. In Alabama, we can't do abortion, and there's 2 of us left that are trying to switch over to reproductive health care centers, but it's difficult. And then you have the Florida Panhandle, and that Pensacola clinic actually just got closed again, which in this case was good because it was a terrible clinic. But there is no abortion clinic until you get all the way over to Tallahassee, which is halfway into the Panhandle. So what we're talking about is from Texas all the way over to halfway through Florida, there are no legal abortion clinics that a person can go to. On top of that, Florida, which is supposed to have the state Supreme Court right to an abortion, has now just passed and allowed to go into effect a 15-week abortion ban. So even in these clinics in Florida that still exist, you can only get an abortion in the first trimester. So this is basically decimating everything as it is, but it's expected that this court challenge now is going to be used, and the state Supreme Court is going to take that opportunity to say, you know, we thought about it a little bit, and it turns out there isn't a right to privacy that protects abortion in the state constitution. So go ahead, pass anything that you want to. And so that leaves us to a point where we have Georgia, which currently is open up till 22 weeks. However, they have a 6-week ban. They expect to go into effect probably by September. And then once you get past that, once that goes into effect, we're talking about, we already lost South Carolina, so North Carolina or Illinois. So that's where we're talking about sending people in Alabama. It's, do you want to go over to North Carolina or do you want to go to Southern Illinois?
And Illinois, that's where I live. It's a kind of a weird case as well because Illinois is overall a blue state, but there's so many rural areas in Southern Illinois that are very red. So if stuff can start going at the local level, it wouldn't surprise me if you'd have to go up closer to mid-state where I live.
And
I was
most
part of
do that.
Oh, sorry.
They go up to Chicago simply because travel-wise, that's the easiest place to go. And with the number of abortion clinics there, that is the easiest way to get an appointment. But Chicago is saying that they're already booked multiple weeks out now as well. Choices, I forgot who said, Hannah, you're from
Tennessee.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
So Choices Reproductive Health Center is in Memphis, I believe. And they have just announced that they are opening a place in Carbondale, Illinois, or whatever is the absolute southernest tip. And so that's
Okay.
to try and move Tennessee people over to, because that'll be the closest access point. We're going to see a lot of people that are opening clinics all over the edges of Illinois. But yes, it's very possible that there could be city council movements, whatever, to make that not happen. And what they're going to do is they're going to do replications of what were called sanctuary cities for the unborn. And those started out in Texas over and over again. And those were the model that became eventually the Texas heartbeat ban, where it was bounty hunters that were able to say, they used the bounty hunter system in order to avoid any sort of challenge that could be done legally.
It's a mess. One thing I do always tell people is make sure you're involved at your local level. I know people are really pissed that we keep being told to just vote, but in Illinois, the reason we don't have a trigger law, because Illinois, everything was illegal up until Roe, where the home of where the Jane Collective did illegal abortions for years. But there was House Bill, which became Senate Bill 40, which a Republican governor signs, that protected abortion rights in Illinois. So it can be done. And then we had the Reproductive Health Act, which made a lot of comprehensive sex ed and enshrined the right to abortion in Illinois. And that only passed because a lot of people worked very hard on it and got it through. And that's, I mean, that's all that's protecting us. Is it's all that happened between now and, I'm sure Missy will tell me in the chat, but it was 2019 for the Reproductive Health Act, I think. So it wasn't very long ago.
And I believe it was last year even that you all then added in the new law that said that minors did not need to inform a parent before they had an abortion. So that has become a really amazing success point for so many teens who, honestly, I don't know where else they're going to go.
Yeah, that's we are working on we did overturn the Parental Notification Act. I know it was a big I know it was a big thing, but there's been a lot going on the past couple of years. I'm not gonna lie.
I used to follow, actually, so my background before I started doing all of this is that I was a state-based reporter. I followed all of the abortion laws back when they were model legislation that were being passed out by Americans United for Life and National Right to Life Committee. And so starting in 2010, that was when we saw all of these boilerplate bills that were being passed out to all of the red states. And it really escalated after the 2010 election because 3/4 of the states ended up in Republican control. And so that was where you started seeing these 20-week bans and heartbeat bills. Most of them were more incremental. They weren't as restrictive as we're seeing now because they were still trying to woo Anthony Kennedy from the Supreme Court into siding with the conservatives because they knew he would be the swing vote, and they didn't want to do anything too rash because they didn't want to accidentally reaffirm Roe v. Wade. But one of the things that was really interesting is every time they would try to introduce an abortion restriction in the state of Illinois, rather than send it to the Health and Human Services Committee, they would send it to agriculture and livestock. And because that way they could get it passed through because there were a lot more Republicans there, but also it led to everybody saying, so what you're saying is that people who can become pregnant are essentially livestock to you that can be used for breeding purposes. So they finally stopped doing that because they realized that that did not look good at all.
I remember sitting in when the Reproductive Health Act was passed. It was when I was still, they wouldn't let you in the state house with any sort of sign or even too loud of t-shirts. So I was one of the handmaidens that sat in the Capitol every day. And now I go away from that imagery now, but at the time it was the best thing we could think of to do. And I remember sitting in that committee and hearing OBGYNs trying to argue against abortion. And I'm like, you sound like you don't know your patients. But yeah, I used to intern for Illinois Agriculture, and that does not surprise me that they would try and pass it that way.
I mean, the reality is that there are a lot of OBGYNs who don't know their patients. And that's the thing that's going to be so upsetting and terrifying as we start heading into this Post-Roe America, where people are going to have pregnancy complications and they aren't going to be able to have doctors who are able to actually help them. I know that at our clinic, one of the things that we're looking at is what can we do for a person if they are miscarrying? Because even before abortion was illegal, people came to us because they did not want to go to their doctors. They came to us because it was cheaper than going into a hospital to get hospital care, and many of them were uninsured. They came to us because they had doctors who didn't know how to do vacuum aspiration in order to remove all of the products of conception. They came to us just because they trusted us, because if you're going to go have some sort of procedure done, you want to go have somebody who's an expert at it rather than somebody who does them maybe once or twice a year. And so we've seen so many people who have come to us because they have bleeding that their doctors have ignored, or they are pregnant again because their doctors wouldn't give them the kind of birth control that they wanted. One thing that we see more often than I can honestly handle with Black women is they give birth and they ask their doctors for IUDs, and their doctors will say, I think you should be sterilized because you've had too many children at this point. And when they say, I don't want to give up my ability to have children, I just don't want to have any like in the next few years, then the doctors say, well, if you want more children, then there's no reason to give you birth control. And that's how we end up with patients who are in and getting abortions because 5 months, 6 months after they've given birth and they weren't allowed birth control, they're pregnant again.
One of the things I was reading about in your book and as well as some articles was the idea of the problems with the Hyde Amendment being that so many people are on Medicaid and that sort of health care that can't be used for abortion services anywhere, correct? Government, because it's considered government money.
So there are a few states that do allow that. Illinois actually is one that allows people to use Medicaid to cover abortions. Minnesota is one as well. There, I believe, are 11 states that allow that currently, and it's something that people want to obviously get more access to. In the South, we don't have obviously Medicaid that can fund abortion, but the reality is in the South, there's a law that says no insurance can cover abortion. So even if a person has their own private insurance, they still have to pay out of pocket in order to have an abortion. This is a law that apparently legislatures can pass, and I don't understand how, because that would seem like it's interfering with private business, but
don't you know you're allowed to interfere with private business if you're interfering with
as
women.
long as you're doing it on the behalf of the unborn. I mean, that's really what all of this comes down to is, so everybody knows that in 2019, Alabama passed the first total, complete, no exceptions abortion ban. And they did that specifically to try to send something up to challenge Roe v. Wade. And that's why they didn't allow any sort of exceptions, or so they said, for sexual assault or for health of the person who's pregnant, only if her life is in complete danger. And so the problem with it right now is that it's also coming to head with the fact that in 2018, the voters approved a ballot amendment that amended the Constitution to say that the state of Alabama has the right to intervene in promoting unborn life. And so now we're at this place where we could say, okay, this is a miscarriage, and so this is something that's allowed. But then there's also the possibility that, okay, but does it come up against the idea of sanctity of unborn life? Over here, you might have IVF, and so you have somebody who says, okay, so I'm going to do infertility treatment, and then I'm going to put a few embryos aside that I don't need to use. Are you allowed to do that? Because the abortion ban says that this does not affect infertility treatments whatsoever, but then we have this amendment over here that says you must always promote and protect unborn life. And so the reality is that we've got a bunch of conflicting laws, and that's purposeful. Like, all of this is supposed to be confusing, because when you have all of these different things that nobody can actually translate, then that means they get to apply them any way that they want to. And they get to use whatever discretion they want when they decide who they're going to charge with what. When we look at what a health exception is for abortion, we aren't being given any sort of instructions, but that's less about them not knowing what they are and more about the fact that they want no exceptions that can be pointed to, because then we at the clinic could possibly do abortions, and they don't want that there. They want, if something is going to happen, that it be done in a hospital, under the banner of the good doctor, and not those of us who are over in a clinic.
So one of the things we had been talking about is that there has been an executive order signed to try to protect reproductive health, but we don't know how much that helps. Could you talk a little bit about that and what it might mean?
Yeah, it doesn't do a damn thing for us down the South. I will be completely honest. It's really disappointing. But also it's not unexpected, because the reality is that there is very little that the federal government can do at this moment. The idea of expanding medication abortion is great, except that we are one of the 13 states that does not allow any form of telemed medical abortion. So it is illegal to mail abortion pills in the US, or I'm sorry, in Alabama, as well as these other states. So you can't expand it, even if they take away the REMS protocol, which is the thing that says that you have to go into a certain doctor and blah, 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 and that they were using in order to say you can't mail it. The REMS protocol won't do anything for us because we still have a ban in place that says that if you take a hit or if somebody gives it to you, then that person is committing an abortion and they will spend 99 years in jail. So no doctor's ever going to actually say, okay, the protocol's gone, so now I can give this to a patient, because they are still liable. And one of the things that I try to explain to people is that if you ask an abortion provider if they would go to jail for providing an abortion, they would probably risk it. But if you ask them if they would give up their medical license and never practice medicine again, that's a totally different thing, because they go into medicine to help people. And this is what they're facing. It's not just the jail time, because maybe you can get a lawyer, maybe you can get out. It's the fact that they are going to have their medical licenses taken from them in their state. And once they're taken from them in that state, they'll lose them in any other state too. So when you are talking about somebody who gets penalized for doing an illegal or so-called illegal abortion, you're talking about the ending of their entire medical career if they are charged with something. And that's purposeful. It's meant to scare people. I call it economic terrorism, essentially. So anyway, to go back to the executive order, there isn't really anything that can be done. The medication is not going to help us. There is the idea of getting more people out, like providing more resources for people to go out of state. That's great. And I know that's something that is being done on every level, in a national level and local levels, in order to try to create a system that can move people from where abortion is illegal to legal. But the reality is that when we do that, we are leaving behind the most marginalized communities, because there are always going to be people who are not going to be able to leave their home. They can't leave because they have too many children, responsibilities, jobs. They can't take that much time away. They're disabled. They are undocumented. They're too young. These are people who are, no matter how much money you provide them, will never be able to leave for care. And we know that because they found it almost impossible just to get across the state to come to us to get an abortion. How are they going to go 3 states over and an airplane and a hotel and all of that and leave their families for that long? So when we're looking at how are we going to help people in a post-Roe America, we have to look at how are we going to help them get abortions where they are with the least amount of effort, resources, but also as legally safe as possible too. And so Biden's executive order doesn't really do much for that. The only thing that honestly could potentially help us here in the South is the idea of all of these pro bono lawyers. That's great. But I mean, I'd really prefer not to get arrested first. So no, it really doesn't do a ton for us. But was there anything that could be done? I really don't know, and that scares me.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was telling someone earlier about some of the activism work I did. I'm like, look, there's a lot of things I would be okay being arrested or being unsafe for, but I'm not going to make it easy for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what, when I rewrote the book, so I had the 2019 version, and then we ended up rewriting it and updating it because COVID hit. And when COVID hit, that was kind of like a dry run for the end of Roe v. Wade, because all of the states that are passing their abortion bans right now were also the states that said, hey, you know, abortion isn't essential health care and people need that PPE, so we're going to just say, okay, close all the abortion clinics. And so we lost Alabama for a couple of weeks. We lost Texas for a couple of months, in Louisiana. And even without the clinics actually being closed, a lot of people were uncomfortable with the idea of traveling, of being inside to go to a clinic. And so that was when they really started moving to trying to obtain medication abortion online. That was the beginning of aidaccess.org. that was when they started getting pills in from out of the country. And we saw not just issues with how trying to obtain medication from outside of the United States can be an issue because it can get stuck in customs, or the supply warehouse that was providing it was also in India, which then was shut down with COVID for a while. These sort of logistical things were things that we couldn't think about until we actually saw them put in place. But also, it gave a much better understanding of what do people need to do in order to protect themselves from any sort of scrutiny or surveillance. If you are getting medication abortion, or if you are getting a medication abortion for someone else, how do you make sure that you have medication in time, that you can still use it in a timely way if it might be getting caught up in customs? So the second version of the book actually took out the entire where you can find everything section that the back end was, and replaced it with a bunch of to-do lists. And so it's to-do lists that show you, okay, if you think you're going to have an abortion at home, here are the things that you should get ready and have together. Or if you are going to want to seek out a legal abortion, here's how you can figure out what will be your closest clinic and all of the resources that you'll need to get there. And then there is, if you are going to try to do things that may not be the most legal, here's a checklist that you can go through to figure out, are you the right person to be doing action that is civil disobedience and might get you in jail? What are the legal risks that might occur, and how will they affect you? Have you considered the fact that you, if you're the family breadwinner, or if you're the one who is taking care of elders or taking care of your children, have you weighed that into what you're going to do when you decide how potentially illegal your activism might be? And then there's a whole section on how to organize, but also how to obtain abortion and abortion information, honestly, at this point, online without giving away your own personal information. Because we see people all the time who get up on Facebook and go into abortion groups and say, okay, I need this help, or I have questions about this clinic, or la la la. And there are anti-abortion activists in these groups because you can't get them out. And they will go through, and if you're using a profile that's your real profile, they'll go and they'll look at your profile and say, oh, hey, this person I can contact. And I will contact this person and say, hey, did you know that so-and-so is actually looking to have an abortion? Maybe you should try to talk her out of it right now. So this happens all the time on Reddit and on Facebook. And so it's about how to create burner accounts, and how to make sure that you're using secure browsers and Signal, so that you're not leaving texts and voicemails and such that could potentially be used against you later. The reality is that this is a very surveilled environment that we are about to embark on, and we know that lots of people are still going to be having abortions because lots of people always had abortions, legal or not. And so our job right now is to help people figure out, how do they find the safest abortion option, and how do they protect themselves from surveillance when they're doing that.
One of the things we were wondering is, how can we, who may be in states where abortion is still legal, help those who seek abortions in Alabama, in Tennessee, in the South, in these places? What is the best ways to help? And I know that could be a lot of different answers, but just some general guidelines for those who are in places where it's legal but feel helpless still.
One of the most important things that I'm asking people to do right now, especially if they are in states where abortion is legal, is to reach out to these states where it is illegal to find out what abortion groups, reproductive justice groups, whatever those organizations that are in those states need and want. Realize that at this point, we're still in a place of complete chaos, because we're still moving people out of our state, figuring out who still needs care, all of that sort of thing. So abortion funds may not respond immediately. But one of the things that has been happening ever since, well, even right before, basically since the leaked document in Politico saying that Roe was going to be overturned, is that we are seeing a large outpouring of support, both from a volunteer perspective and a financial perspective, but it's going to receiving states. So everything that's happening, we're seeing clinics that are being funded and built that are new clinics in these receiving states, or we're seeing people who are giving lots of money to help people travel, but they're giving it to the activists in the receiving states. There needs to be resources that go into these red states. Because they're usually much poorer, and so resources go a lot further. But what's happening is we're watching an activist network that is slowly kind of collapsing on itself because, for whatever reason, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I think that people are giving primarily to receiving state organizations. One is the fact that a lot of people who support abortion, that's their states, those are their people, and we always say give locally, so it makes sense. Another is the fact that honestly, it's sexy to help people get abortions. Like it makes you feel good. So if you are helping to build a clinic and fund a clinic that is going to be providing abortions, people want to do that. And I get it, but those are going to be in blue states. And then there's a bit of racism, I think, that happens in this idea of, if I'm going to give my money, I give money to people that I understand, that are like me. I already know these groups. I know these organizations. I've seen their work. And so because of that, we see predominantly that especially white privileged people tend to give to groups that match them. And so we're watching a drain of resources that are happening in these southern states. We're losing our clinics, which is terrifying. And now we're losing the financial support that these activists were using, not just to help people get abortions in their state or out of state, because we were already doing that even before Roe. We're losing support that is used for us to organize down here, for us to make change when it comes to trying to expand Medicaid, to try to end gerrymandering, all of the things that are happening here where there really aren't that many more conservative voters. It's just they're the ones who are allowed to vote. So the best thing that you can do to help somebody who's seeking an abortion in a red state is to provide any sort of resource you can to those red states rather than to where they're going to end up, because people know what to use their resources for, because they know their own landscape, they know their own area, they know their own networks and activists. And that's the best way to help people, is to trust them to know what to do with what you can provide.
That's one of the reasons we chose NAF. We weren't able to do the National Network of Abortion Funds with the way we set up our fundraiser, but we liked the idea that they had hotlines that were multilingual so they could help connect people to what was needed.
So I'm really excited about the fundraiser and about NAF. I do want to say one thing, which is like the super secret thing that activists don't talk about, which is it's always better if you can to find an organization locally that you can give to, just because national organizations are hard in general. But right now, one thing that is happening with national organizations when it comes to abortion at this moment is they're playing defensive and they're playing scared. And I get it. Like I spend every waking moment right now wondering if the next words that come out of my mouth are going to get me put in jail, because I know that that's what they want to do down here, and that's why we're not getting clarity on what we can and can't do, and why in Alabama we are not positive if, when the clinic reopens on Monday, we are allowed to tell people where to go that is not us in order to get an abortion, because our AG is looking at what constitutes conspiracy. So we are weighing out our own how we feel about the risks that we're willing to take, and that's what we're going to figure out next week. But national organizations, because they are working with so many different other states and different populations and all of these aspects that they're weighing out, I feel like a lot of them are playing they're being way too cautious when it comes to their legal risk. And one really good example of this is the fact that NAF is not funding Kentucky right now, even though Kentucky actually does have legal abortion. It's currently, their ban is currently being blocked by the courts. But because that's still like a squishy area, NAF is not giving money to clinics in that state. But the abortion funds that are still working in that state are still funding the patients and are now picking that up. So it's not like a don't do this. It's just a understand that when you're going to, it's what I always say about national versus local. Like, you're always going to make the most impact locally. But I also recognize that you all are a huge and amazing network of people. And so it makes sense to do something that is a national thing and that has national impact. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because you are such an amazing example of how when you get a bunch of people who are interested in something and mad about something and want to do something important, and you all pool together, that's how you make real change.
I did just put up the National Network of Abortion Funds website if anybody wants to take a look and donate to one close to you, or where there's challenges or people you care about, so you can take a look at those.
But also get the NAF fundraiser above 50,000 so that I can give away books, please.
Oh yeah, please do. I did. One of our friends, her father has been watching our fundraiser, and every time somebody donates at a weird exchange rate or covers the fees and it gets like to a weird number that doesn't end in a 5 or a 0, he's like, really, why isn't it even? So we're like, please get it to 50,000 so her father may know peace.
I totally understand that. That would, yeah. Okay, let me just give you a little more here.
We were laughing the other day. It was just like 46,369 for like 3 hours, and I'm just sitting there giggling because I'm 12.
Of course, my brain just did that too. It's
fine. I'm glad that it's not. My sister wants us to get to 69,000 just so she can just plaster it all over everything.
Oh my God.
Are you okay with taking a couple of questions? We've got a couple in the chat. Are you good with taking questions?
I like taking questions. I don't see any in the chat, but
oh no, I'm going to pop them up. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm like,
I don't know if you can see comments, but I can put them on the screen. Ace Overton asks, what advice would you give to people that just feel hopeless?
Oh God, I was going to say, I'm not hopeless at all. I am on this manic depressive cycle, apparently, of hope, rage. Like, I kind of explain it as, it kind of feels like if somebody died, except that it's our rights died rather than a person. But you go through the same cycle of grief. You are sad, you're angry, you don't believe it. The thing I'm not getting to, and I'm very happy about, is that I've never hit acceptance, because I'm not going to accept this. I'm not. It's not going to be like this for very long. The amount of people that have come out saying that this is horrifying is amazing. There was this Yahoo article that I just saw. If you follow me on Twitter, it's Robin Marty on Twitter, and I just posted it, and it said that the only demographic that is becoming more quote unquote pro-life is men over 50. Like, everybody else is becoming more pro-choice, according to the Pew Research, except for men over 50. Now, what's the problem there? That's who's flipping running all the government. So, of course, we're getting abortion bans and all of that, because the majority of, and apparently the older you get, like when they're younger, then they're more pro-choice. But as they get older, they become against abortion for some reason. But the idea that that is the only group that does not believe that bodily autonomy belongs to each person, like, that makes me feel so good. In Alabama, we've been having marches over and over again. Like, it's fabulous. I live in the birthplace of the civil rights movement, and I've only been here for like a year and a half, but this is the greatest place to be at this moment. Like, every time I turn around, I feel more and more hopeful, because this is a horrible moment, but it also is the moment that lit everybody on fire. And I love that. And so now we just have to figure out, what do we do to direct it? And yes, we need to vote. We all know that. But we also know that elections aren't going to save us because they never have and they never will. So what we need is, as we said before, get involved locally however you can. Get involved in local city council races. Get involved in local school board races. Anything you can do local, because we already know that there are sheriffs. The sheriff in New Orleans has said that he's not going to prosecute any person or that is involved in illegal abortion, which would be way more helpful if there was actually an abortion clinic there. But still, the message is good. The city of Austin, Texas is saying that they are going to not prosecute if at all possible. And 2 years before that, they actually started providing money in the city council for people to leave Texas in order to get abortions. So cities can do so much. There is so much that we can do on a local level, and we can just build the power there, because that's honestly how it was taken away from us, is because we spent so much time focused on how do we save the federal government, when the reality was the real power was in our backyards the whole time.
Missy has a question about how do you have suggestions for finding local organizations that aren't the big names that we can help? Like we all know about Planned Parenthood and stuff like that, but where how do you find these grassroots groups that need our help?
I think probably there are a couple of really easy ways to do that. And one is, if you Google your state and abortion fund, they are usually tied in with local network groups that do lots of other things. But also, a lot of our work organizing down here has been done through a network of Black Lives Matters activists. And they are the most knowledgeable on how to pull together diverse groups and how to make big statements, and honestly could use all of the bodily support possible. So if you are trying to figure out where you can fit yourself in, the best thing to do is just Google your state or Google your city, and then figure out there used to be a lot of NARALs, state-based NARALs, but that network also has dissolved because National NARAL was really, really problematic. So they're all renaming themselves. So they're a good place to go, and you can find them. So I wish there was a better way to figure that. I had all of this information up on my website, and then I started running an abortion clinic, and so now it's not as updated as it could be. But if you go to postrohandbook.com there and scroll down, there is a national map on it, and if you click on that post, you can click on any state in the map, and it's all the information that was in my handbook in 2019 about all of the different local organizations you can get involved with, all the different local clinics that you can find, all of the local practical supports and abortion funds. And some of the names may have changed, but for the most part, they're all still the same.
We have a good... Ace also was wondering, has anybody attempted to use religious freedom to block these requests for pro-life laws? I thought that I was reading somewhere that there was a couple of rabbis, because Jewish law states
there's
life
something in
begins
Jewish
at-
law.
So there is a attempt on that, and the idea is that because in Jewish law it's first breath, that anything else is against their religion. There are two, well, not problems. I'll bring up two concerns with that. One is that the right has already come up with their own counter argument for it, which is that those Jewish rabbis do not represent all of Judaism, because there's also really, really conservative Judaism that believes that life begins at the moment of conception and essentially is in bed with the evangelical Christians. And so who's to say who's the real Jew or something like that?
And yet the evangelicals are allowed to speak for all of Christianity.
I know, right? It's
Sorry.
funny how it always
angry.
works out in your favor. My own personal thing is that while I think that's, I mean, obviously if one religion gets to have freedom, then all religions should get to have freedom. I don't want to have to do something because of religion. Like I'm not a religious person. I'm a spiritual person, but the idea of, okay, so I can have freedom through this religion or freedom through this religion, but why can't I just have freedom? That's where I am. And so when we look at this idea of using religious exemptions on the other side, I feel like it almost boosters the idea that the conservatives are putting out, that there should be religious freedom and that should be the priority for everything. And so I just really worry that that's going to backfire in general, especially as someone who does not want to live in a theocratic state, regardless of who is theocrating all over the place.
I also see problems with that. I was recently reading something before I got on that there's places now somewhere in the South, I don't remember which state, my apologies.
It's probably me. Did I do it? It's probably us.
No. I think it was Tennessee or Kentucky, so I'm going to blame Hannah.
Yeah, we probably did it.
They were allowed to start putting up "No Jews Allowed" signs, and I'm like, that's
that sounds about right for some parts of Tennessee.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that's Alabama, because honestly, in Alabama, it would be "No Blacks Allowed." So, and those signs are already there, unfortunately. But those aren't us. Those are not the real. I believe that those are not the civil rights Alabamans, and those are the ones I stand with.
That's when we remind people that your feminism is intersectional or it is bullshit. Which brings me to, I put this comment up for a while. My friend Missy was talking about some of the concerns about bounty laws. She has a disability and uses a personal care assistant. So if it goes to a bounty laws, you're putting a lot of people at risk that help people. I read a couple of articles she sent me about how access to abortion is a disability issue, but with requiring travel, with people even clinics just aren't accessible and stuff like that. Do you have...
It's really true. I want to go back to the whole clinics aren't accessible thing, because it's been a thing that has really upset me quite a bit, is the fact that there are... clinics should be accessible because they are healthcare facilities. And one thing that has always really upset me is the fact that issue is one that's actually used to harm clinics in a lot of ways. And so it kind of has this like back and forth double-edged sword thing going on to it, because the same things that make a clinic accessible for all people are also the same things that oftentimes you would see lawmakers pass legislation on saying were mandatory in order to try to make clinics close. So when we heard targeted regulation of abortion providers, trap laws, a lot of what they were doing were requiring ADA access, pretty much. But that was just like one part of the trap law. But so it feels almost like sometimes clinic owners were fighting against the very thing that they were fighting against, things that make clinics more accessible, because it was so easily tied up in legislation that was really meant just to try and close these clinics altogether. I will say that I am very proud of the fact that we have a wheelchair access at our clinic. So we are handicap accessible. One of the first things that we did when we took over the clinic in 2020 is we made sure that we had new beds that were brought in for people that were wider, because there were many cases where people were not able to fit on one of the exam room tables, and that is an accessibility issue as well. And so modifying clinics in order to make sure that everybody can get to them and into them and get the same sort of care is a really, really important thing to happen for everyone and for equality. As for the bounty hunter things, I don't know, like, at some point the Supreme Court has to step up and say this can't happen. And I don't know if they just did not weigh in on this prior because they wanted to keep abortion as inaccessible as possible until they made their decision to overturn Roe. I am hoping that now that Roe is gone, that we will see movement on them saying this is not the way that the law works, because the reality is that once you have citizens who can enforce a law, then you've upended the entirety of your legal system, because that's not how it's supposed to work. and that citizens cannot enforce law. Citizens cannot be used as a way to put laws in place. This is not how justice is. And so the courts need to come back and say that this can't happen, because we know Oklahoma just passed it as well. And National Right to Life Committee put forth a model legislation that they want all of the states to consider trying to introduce in the next legislative session that would expand bounty hunting idea for all of the states, but also would be enforceable on people who are providing abortion information. Like this website, this broadcast right now would be considered against the law in these states. And then all it would take is one person to say, okay, I'm turning this into such and such state. And so it's chaos. It can't happen. So I'm hoping that that'll disappear very quickly, because if we see more states turn to that, then essentially we're nothing but a bunch of fragmented states and militias.
Let me tell you, if citizens could enforce laws, everybody would use their turn signal. I would make sure of it. But I feel like that's not.
And pick up their dog poop. No offense, dog people, but man.
No, I'm with you.
No, I'm all for that.
It's just, guys, when we started on this podcast journey, I expected to discuss bounty hunters like with the Book of Boba Fett, not to be here wondering if in the future us talking about this would be illegal.
I did make it go around to Star Wars somewhere.
There you go.
I figured we had to tie it in for the people who are there. Did we have any questions, I guess, with you guys on the stream? I feel like I've done all the talking. My apologies.
I have a question, Robin, and it's more so relating to the politics of it all. Like, obviously, when the new justices, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett were confirmed, they were like, oh, this is the law of the land. We're not going to do anything to, disrupt that. Obviously, total lie. Right. And then we have Lauren Boebert saying, the separation of church and state, that's a bunch of junk, kind of advocating for a Christian law-based system. So with her, you can go to the ballot boxes, try to vote. But with the justices, unfortunately, that seems to be a little more out of our direct hands. So I was asking, what can we do to sort of put, pressure to see, what can happen in that front?
Expand the court. There is nothing else that can be done other than to expand the Supreme Court. We are looking at 4 justices, 3 of whom were illegitimately put up by a president that was not elected with the majority of votes in the United States, and also was impeached twice, and also tried to have a coup. I feel like in general that should be something that should allow us to go back and look at the court. And since obviously there's no way to pull Supreme Court justices, I think that we are utterly justified in the idea of expanding the Supreme Court, especially when you look at the fact that every person who is put in is under the age of 50, which means that there are at least 30 to 40 more years of their jurisprudence on that bench. Mm-hmm. We need to demand that all of our candidates that we are going to support say that they will put pressure either on this president or a future president to make sure that the Supreme Court is expanded. Roosevelt did it there, and that's how we got to where we are. There's no reason not to add more justices. Like, even if it were just enough to make things even, we need to do that, because I think everyone recognizes that at this point, there is something out of whack. And when the whole checks and balances system was set up, the court was always supposed to be the weakest part. It was never supposed to be a court that is making law. And that is what this court is doing right now. So the court has lost its mandate. And that is a justifiable reason for someone to, as president, say, okay, we're going to throw in 3 more seats.
Who has the power to expand the court? Is it just a presidential thing, or is it something that goes through Congress?
I think it would have to go through Congress, and so you would have to do the filibuster. But I believe that the idea is that if the president were to say that this was something that he supported, that would make it able to go through Congress. And also, for some reason, I'm thinking it's just a House vote. Like, the House has to support it, but the Senate doesn't, because the Senate is the one that confirms the Supreme Court. But I could be making that up. But the point is, we have to fight for it on all levels, because clearly we've lost control of democracy in general.
We are coming up on an hour, so does anybody have any final question or thoughts? Thank you, Robin, so much for coming on.
Thank you
It's
so
Yes,
much.
thank you.
honor.
Part of the reason I was being so quiet is just I was just taking all this in because as like little baby advocate here, a lot of it's just been so overwhelming, and especially in a state where they expedited their trigger law as fast as they possibly could, which was fantastic, let me tell you.
Well, and going back to the whole what gives me hope, it is the baby advocates. Like, there are so many baby advocates, and that's why I just want to talk. I mean, I just want to grab you all in my arms and comfort you and tell you that it's going to be okay. And also, I'm going to tell you a little story. So here's my little story. It was 2016, I think it was. And I was still a reporter. I was doing a piece for Politico, and it was about the protests that were happening right before Hellerstedt v. Whole Women's Health, which was yet another one of the legal cases that affirmed Roe v. Wade. And so my reporting back then was about, I used to embed with anti-abortion activists. That was my jam. And so I was talking to all of the anti-abortion activists that were at the court that day, and everyone knew that they were going to lose. They were very, very sure of it. And I was talking to Kristen Hawkins, who was the president and still is the president of Students for Life. And she was talking about how she is trying to explain to her activists who were really, really sad all the time that they were going to lose, but it was okay because you don't get really big changes at once, and you can't, it's not just going to be, okay, you're involved now, and now abortion is going to be illegal. And I never ended up publishing this article, but I kept thinking about how now she's talking about, oh, look, this is the moment, everything changed, we won, it's all over. And I'm like, 6 years ago, you thought you guys were never going to be able to accomplish anything, and you couldn't figure out how you were going to be able to hold your activists together. So what I'm trying to do is look at this moment as this was our 2016. And so we have a newly engaged, newly excited bunch of people who are ready to do the work, but not even just do the work, but make sure that it's not another case of Roe says that this decision is between a woman and a doctor, and if a doctor says she can have an abortion, then she can have an abortion. This is about abortion as bodily autonomy and a human right. And so it belongs to each person, regardless of whether there is a doctor who wants to provide it, whether there's a clinic that can be open for it. It belongs to each person. And this is our chance to start over and make it right.
And it also, because of the way Roe was written, it's been used as a argument for so many other things. It would be good if we can codify all those as well. As a queer person, I'm honestly friggin' terrified right now. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yep.
What you were saying with that is the quote that we always seem to come up with here is there's a quote in one of the Star Wars movies that says, hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you see it, you'll never make it through the night. And that's kind of where I feel like a lot of us are at right now, that we have to believe in hope, even if it doesn't seem like we can. Thank you, Robin, so much. Can you let people know where they can find you and your books? And please read Robin's book. It's a great source of information. You can get the older version on Audible. It's a 5-hour listen. It was a great listen. The woman who does the narration does a very soothing voice. So I'm like, okay, I'm hearing about the worst case scenario, but I'm really calm about it.
Lovely. I know. I listened to her sample, and I'm like, this is the voice. Also, I really wanted to make sure that a Black woman was doing the narration. So I was very excited to be able to have that happen as well. I am Robin Marty. I am Robin Marty on Twitter. Actually, that's where I do most of my talking in general. And my book is New Handbook for Post-Roe America. And there's also a book called End of Roe v. Wade that I wrote with a legal analyst that is looking at all of the model legislation that was meant to overturn Roe v. Wade. You can also find me at West Alabama Women's Center, which is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and no longer provides abortions. However, we are currently in the process of reopening right now to provide trans health care, HIV care, contraceptive care, and will also be a safe place for people to come to should they manage their own abortions and have questions, or should they have miscarriages and be afraid to go into their hospital because they think they're going to get arrested. So if you go to my Twitter and you have any interest in helping us pay for our sliding scale contraception, that there's a GoFundMe link on my pinned tweet that you can go and feel free to help us out with.
Thank you so much for coming on. For followers of the Force, you know how to find us. Please follow What Choice 22, which is our Twitter page for this fundraiser. Donate to us, donate to the Amidala Initiative, which is trying to fund Equality Texas because of the attacks on trans people in the state. And always remember, guys, when we were putting together this fundraiser, we picked the Rogue One imagery for a reason, and I was not the one that picked that. It's because it's the idea of this little group fighting against impossible odds, but they make a difference. So thank you all so much for being in the chat. We will, if we have any more questions that come up, we will try and find answers and put them on our Twitter. But thank you again so much, Robin. And until next time, everyone, may the Force be with you.